All right, hey everybody. So I want to show you how to clear glaze or really use any of the dipping glazes. So first off, you need to have some Bisqueware. It has to be Bisqueware. Check. Does it sound like a bell when you tap it? Did it change color? Has it been out to the kiln yard and come back? Right? You want to make sure all of those things. So the next thing is, sometimes this will be on the floor. It was easier for me to do the video with this up on the table. And if we're all using just clear, then sometimes I do put it on the table because it's easier. So the clear glaze is made up of a lot of different components, and they all need to be in suspension with one another for it to work properly. So to do that, you're gonna need to stir it. So we have this crazy stir stick here, and you're gonna stir it. And if you lift the stick up and there's any goopy stuff on the bottom, keep stirring. Okay, all that goopy stuff is really important. If you don't mix this and the glaze settles out, it can either ruin your color or it might not come out shiny. There's all kinds of craziness that can happen if you don't stir your glaze well enough. So once you have stirred the glaze, depending on how big your piece is and if there's somebody waiting in line behind you, you can either leave the stick in here, or if you're the last person, then you want to wash the stick and put the lid back on. If we leave the lid off, then it'll all dry out and then we don't have any glaze. So I want to make sure that, like I said, this is Bisqueware. I've already wiped it down with my clean, damp sponge. That part's really important. You don't want to get gunk in here, and you also don't want to have gunk on your project because then in the kennel it'll be horrible. So you're going to hold this. Now, depending on what it is you're trying to glaze, you want to make sure you have a firm hold on it. Like, you don't want to just like hold it by the little tip or something like that, because this is still fragile. So like if you were glazing a mug, do not hold it by the handle for dunking. Okay, do not hold your mug by the handle until it has been fully glaze fired, regardless. Okay, but you never want to hold it by something small and fragile. Even a handle, don't hold it, because you'll just break it. Because what this is going to do, this is still porous. So when I dunk it in here, this is going to soak up some of that glaze. And by doing that, since it's adding on water and glaze, it's going to get way heavier. So if you're holding on to a handle and this all of a sudden becomes super crazy heavy, it's going to break. So now I'm going to go ahead and dip this. But first, oh my gosh, I am an excessive talker. I'm very verbose, I know. And you know what? I haven't stirred this enough yet. So I'm gonna stir it again. So you're gonna stir, and then you're gonna stir again. And then if you are chatting with somebody, stir again. Because you can never have too much stirring, right? All right. So I don't feel any more crusties in the bottom. When I look, there's no crusties on the stick. So I am good. So I'm gonna leave this to the side. I'm gonna hold this, and I'm gonna dip it down, and I'm gonna count for how long. I'm gonna go lollipop, lollipop, oh lolly, 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 lollipop, right? Okay, so it's a lollipop in, lollipop, right? Lolly in, pop out. Okay, and you can kind of shake it a little bit. If there's any little bubbles and stuff, you can kind of blow on it, and that'll pop any little bubbles that are on there. Right? Okay. Now you can see it started off really shiny, and now it's, so like the shininess you can see right there, and you can see how some parts are already starting to be a matte finish. Now, if you had underglazed this first and you did this, most of the time students are like, oh my God, Lizzie, it got covered up, right? Because this isn't clear yet, right? We haven't fired it yet, but if your underglaze does not show through this, I already checked and made sure that this was the clear glaze. So I know it's the clear glaze. This will turn clear when it's being fired in the kiln. So if you underglazed on this and then you put this over and you can't see your underglaze anymore, totally fine. Okay. Now I do need to wait until this is dry before I dip this side, because clearly I didn't dip this side, right? It is okay to have a little bit of an overlap, but you want to make sure that it's dry enough that you can hold it without getting your fingers all gross, because then you're just taking glaze off. The other thing that I never thought was a thing, but I see students do all the time, and I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? Is they'll pet their glaze. They'll just be sitting here like petting their glaze, like while they're waiting for somebody to move. And if you're petting the glaze, you're basically scraping off all of the color, creating silica dust, which is right next to your face, and you're breathing in silica dust, which is not good for your lungs. So you don't want it, like, A, it ruins your color, B, it's not good for your lungs. So don't pet your glaze, okay? So now that this is dry, and it didn't take that long because this was already, like, I had wiped it off, but just with a clean damp sponge so it wasn't soaking. So now I want to dip the other side. So I can hold this side and I'm going to overlap it. I'm going to go all the way across, right? I don't want to have to think about it too much. So I'm going to go all the way across. But I've been sitting here chatting with you, so what do I need to do? Stir the glaze. Right. Okay. Stirring, stirring, stirring. Ah. And if you're the first person to stir the glaze for a while, it's gonna take a little while. But like if you're like the 8th person in line, then it's not that bad, okay? But you do have to stir it every single time, okay? All right, so here we go. Lollipop. Okay, so sometimes, and when I'm blowing on this, I'm just popping some of the little bubbles. Okay. So now if I don't want to stand here and hold this for a billion years, and I had thought about it beforehand, I would have grabbed myself a piece of newspaper so I could set this on the counter. Because if I just set this on the table, I'm going to leave a big old spot that I'm going to have to clean up, right? But if I brought over a piece of newspaper, I could set it and then throw that away. That would have been way smarter, but I didn't. But I do have that and I'll clean. One thing that's really important is we're not done yet. We have to wipe the bottom, okay? The bottom of your project has to get wiped off. Now, if you can do that while it's still slightly damp, that's actually fantastic. So I'm gonna turn you around here and we're gonna be at the sink. Yeah. And we're gonna clean this off. So we don't want this glaze in the main sink. So remember, always make sure that the water, and when you're squeezing your sponge, it is going into that bucket that we talked about before, right? So I'm gonna rinse out the sponge because who knows who has used this sponge. Do you trust everybody to rinse out your sponge for you? I don't either. Okay, so I'm gonna rinse it out. I'm gonna squeeze all the water out. I don't wanna get a bunch of water on this, but I do wanna make sure this is damp. And I'm just gonna start wiping off the bottom. And once your sponge starts getting kind of funky, you're gonna need to rinse it again. The more often you rinse it, the quicker this will go. And if you do this right away, unlike what I did where I set it down and was like talking, if you do this right away after dipping, it's actually really easy to get it off. Now you wanna make sure that you get the entire bottom so you can see it starting to come clean. You wanna get the entire bottom and you wanna get an 1/8 inch up the side, okay? At least an 1/8 inch, sometimes a 1/4 inch. It depends on what kind of glaze it is, if it's gonna run or not. All right, so you can see I'm cleaning. Boo, boo, boo. And every time my sponge starts to get funky, I'm gonna rinse it. Okay, so at this point, I'm like, oh, the bottom looks clean. Except when I go like this, see how this side's really close? So I still need a little bit more. Now, a good way to check this, the best way to check this, the way I check this when students ask me if they're done, is I will literally, ooh, that was loud. I will literally set it on the table. I will squat down and I will look. And I'm gonna look and see if I can clearly see a clean spot all the way around. That's 1/4 inch up. Now on this one, it's close, but it's not quite there. If you're like concerned and you're not sure, like, oh, where do I need to do it? Take a pen or a pencil, probably a pencil, and set it flat on the table and spin it. And you can mark, literally mark on your project how high you need to wipe, because that's about the right height, okay? So when I did that, you can see my little line here. So I've got this little line. I know I still need to do that area. So once that area is all nice and clean, then I know it's clean and it's ready for firing, and it can go out on the wear cart out in the kiln yard, ready to be fired. All right, thanks everybody.